Welcome back, everyone. There have been more and more stories about tech censorship and also technology becoming basically the arbiters of free speech, free expression, and also having the ability to shut down competitors, it seems, like with Parler on a whim. Now, to learn more about this and the idea of technocracy, what we are possibly moving towards, we have here to speak with us Patrick Wood. He's the Executive Director of Citizens for Free Speech. Hey, Patrick Wood, a real great having you on.
Great. I'm glad to be with you, Joshua. Thank you.
So first of all, tell us what technocracy refers to.
This was an ideology that started, or a system that started back in the early 1930s at Columbia University in New York City. And engineers and scientists at that time believed capitalism was dead and that they, and only they, had some kind of a mandate to create a brand new economic system that was resource-based economic system that would control the entire economy. They failed, basically. There was a huge movement in the 30s and 40s in America, North America, and Canada as well. But it kind of fizzled in the mid-40s as the economy recovered. Capitalism was not dead. But it came back to life in the early 1970s, and it began to mature. And the global elite got a hold of the concept, finally, that this resource-based economic system could be a very keen way to grab the resources of the world and kind of control the whole economic system. And we've blossomed into that today. We see the fruit of this system today all over. For instance, the World Economic Forum's Great Reset that they're talking about right now. That basically is warmed over technocracy from the 1930s.
So oftentimes we hear the Great Reset, a lot of people think, oh, that's a socialist movement, or maybe it's just some weird idea they have. Now, we don't often hear people use the word technocracy. It's more like a sci-fi term, like a dystopian term. How do these relate to each other?
Well, over the years, the communist Marxist socialist meme has given way to the system of technocracy. I think it probably was best predicted by Zbigniew Brzezinski back in 1970. And remember, Brzezinski was the political scientist. He was a co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He worked for Jimmy Carter as his national security advisor. Brzezinski was the guy that brought Deng Xiaoping to America and solidified relationships with then communist China, which looked a lot like North Korea does today. It was a train wreck by and large economically. But as they brought China back into the world stage, they didn't seed China with the concepts of free market economics, for instance. They fed them with the ideology of technocracy. That caused a blending, if you will, for some time between the CCP and communism in general and this technocratic system of social management, of total management of the economy and the people in it. And so today, we still see the trappings of communism around the world. We can see it in Russia, we can see it in China as well, and several other countries. But if you look deeper, you see that there's a group of people, a core of engineers and scientists that are working to use high technology to capture the entire society, all of the people in it, and to control and engineer the economic system.
Now, with this idea of this Great Reset or technocracy or whatever we want to call it, one of the big things we're seeing right now in the United States is big corporations basically flexing their muscles and showing that they have the power to silence people, that they could deplatform the President of the United States himself, to the extent that even foreign leaders like Angela Merkel in Germany are voicing their concerns about this as a precedent. An interesting turn, because some people who don't support Trump are concerned about him being deplatformed by this big tech. They're also showing they can destroy companies pretty much on a whim, like what they did with Parler. Does this align with this agenda? And if so, how does it align?
I hate to say it absolutely aligns perfectly. And it isn't a total shock. It's a surprise, but it's not a shock that it was coming. We've seen this coming for a long time, where the censorship of the exercise censorship of these big platforms has been increasingly worse. I spotted it probably 5 or 6 years ago, 2 years ago, or in 2018, 3 years ago, I was so alarmed at the collusion between these big platforms that's what caused me to found the nonprofit organization Citizens for Free Speech. And now today we see the collusion is absolutely in the open. There's no doubt about it now. When 3 big tech companies of the biggest, the Apple, Google, and Amazon, can conspire to take down an entire operating company that happens to be a competitor as well, can take down a company like that in the course of one day by just disappearing them from the app stores and from, taking away the connections to their database and their processing power in the cloud. This is unprecedented. And they're still hiding behind this idea, well, it's, they violated our policy rules. No, I'm sorry. This goes so far beyond any private property issues or anything else. This is just murder, really. And we see that they're basically thumbing their nose at the whole thing right now. They say, well, you guys can complain out there, but, hey, we got the power. We're on top. We will do what we want to do.
Now, this idea, again, of them censoring individuals, censoring the president, deplatforming, and pretty much destroying the business of Parler, at least for the time being. One thing I've mentioned on my show is it does seem to be that they were able to do this, but it does open the doors, for example, for competitors to open their own businesses and build competing markets. I guess first off, under this agenda, would that still be possible for competitors to come about if you have enough money for it, or how would this work?
Yeah. It's going to happen. There's a lot of pop-ups right now that have emerged, and I think there's going to be more. The problem is, I think, if you get too big, and like in the case of Parler, they were stripping users away from Twitter primarily, not exclusively, primarily. When they got probably to the 15 to 20 million mark of users, these other social media companies probably got a little bit nervous. This is going in the wrong direction. We need to stop this before it gets too big. And I've said this probably many times over the last 2 or 3 years, that the populist movement in America, which elected President Trump, it could have been anybody, but they elected Trump. And they're the ones that really are kind of moving back and forth amongst the social platforms, this populist movement. It promoted populism initially. Now, the big tech companies are scared to death of the populist movement in America. And when Trump said, they're not after me, they're after you, there was some truth to that, I believe. And we see the oppression and the censorship coming against elements within that larger populist movement. And there's obviously different flavors of people that are in the populist movement for different reasons. But everybody seems to be a target right now to shut people up and keep the alternative narrative, that is the narrative that's not their narrative, keep that suppressed. And that seems to be what's happening here.
It's an interesting dynamic here. Real quick for our viewers, it's actually Epoch Times, our printing press in Hong Kong, was actually set on fire by masked individuals who we believe were tied to the Chinese Communist Party. We've actually faced many things like this over the years. But, it's interesting that on these tech platforms, a lot of them lured people in. They built their entire business model off of allowing people to have a forum to connect and have discussions. And now we see them implementing these different free speech laws, essentially, from the business side, not from the government side. And, it's a dynamic we're watching happen, where even though we're not living in a socialist state, the big businesses are essentially enforcing their own system of laws through the denial of services. And they're leveraging their own pretty much monopolies over these services in order to punish people for violating things that aren't technically illegal. It's a very bizarre dynamic. Now, I guess what I'm interested in hearing from you is there an agenda behind this? And do you think these people are aware of an agenda if there is one?
Yes. I do believe there is an agenda behind it, and I see it from several different aspects. One, just my historical studies, and second, you look at the concentrated attack on all 5 elements of the First Amendment right now. They've all been under attack. simultaneously. It would be almost statistically impossible to get them all at the same time. You've got expression of religion, free speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble, and the right to expect redress of grievances from the government. All five of those have been shattered to pieces in the last year, and the attack had started actually before that, probably 5-6 years ago. So you see the attack on the First Amendment. But at the same time, you see people like with the Economic Forum, for instance. Klaus Schwab does routine little video things on social media as well as just on their own website, where he's actually preaching this agenda openly to the corporate world, because he's the founder and the highly respected guy of the World Economic Forum, where everybody goes every year. Maybe they don't know the WEF, and they know the name Davos, D-A-V-O-S, in Switzerland, where they all meet. It's the creme de la creme of economic power that comes to the World Economic Forum conferences. He's openly preaching this right now. You know, I can't call it a conspiracy anymore. It may have been at one time where they just were quiet about it, but now they're openly advocating these policies, and they're basically proud of the whole thing, really. They're saying this is the wave of the future, this is the fourth industrial revolution, and you just better get used to it because, hey, you know, we know what we're doing and we know better than you.
I guess just last question. Now, you have a pretty high-level view of what's happening with all this. Based on what you understand, what is the next step with these individuals in terms of carrying out this agenda? And also, what can people do about it?
Wow, that's a $64 question, isn't it? We're going to see a massive increase in surveillance and control in 2021. It's already started with vaccine passports, with large companies setting their own policies in America, even if they're technically illegal or technically unconstitutional. It doesn't matter. They're doing it anyway. These people that are doing this have adopted a lawless mentality, by the way. They don't think the law applies to them anymore. But we're going to see huge not just censorship, but we're going to see a huge increase in surveillance and what I call the total awareness society, where all the sensors that are placed that will track you. There was a story about Venice just recently in CNN Travel, I think it was, that said Venice now is tracking every visitor that comes to town. They know exactly where they are at all times. They follow them around the city step by step. They know everything, what country they came from, when they leave the city. This is like George Orwell on steroids, I have to say. So we're seeing that come, and people have pointed at China for a long time, say, oh, they got it bad over there. My friends, I say, most of the technology that they are using over there originated here, but it was illegal to do it here, so they just gave it to China. Now it's coming back to be re-imported into our country. We're seeing now these very same concepts, ideas, patterns emerge in America, and we're that close from being trapped into this system. It is ultimately a scientific dictatorship. How can we get away from this? That's the big question. When I started Citizens for Free Speech, which is citizensforfreespeech.org, by the way, my concept was that people needed to return to local activism, to get their eyeballs off of Washington, which is not going to save us out here, and focus on their local communities, their own school boards and water boards and city councils and all of the other planning commissions, et cetera, to drive the wokeness out of their own communities and get some kind of sanity back in and rebuild the fabric of America from the ground up. Honestly, I don't think there's anything from the top down at this point that's going to make a whit's worth of difference, because these people are so integrated into government. The government is now promoting many of these technocratic programs that are really kind of capturing us right now. So obviously they're not going to come and rescue us. I think it can only be done on a local level. And Citizens for Free Speech teaches people how to do that. That's what we're trying to do anyway.
Hey, Patrick Wood, great having you on. Thank you.
My pleasure, Joshua.